how did the fight start?
Well, it started when London won the bid for the Olympics, and we realised as an allotment society that there were big implications for us because our site was right in the middle of where they were proposing to build the Olympic Park. So once we realised this, then we decided we needed to try and engage with them about it and see if we could convince them that we should be incorporated into this amazing event. Unfortunately, they weren't particularly interested in having that discussion with us, and so we began to try and raise public awareness by going to the media. We had a lot of success in getting media attention, and it just rolled on from there.
But it ended in failure. Did you think you'd succeed?
We lost the war, but we won some of the battles. So we managed to get them to find and build us a new temporary site that we could all be relocated to as a community.
Was it nearby?
About 1.5 kilometres away, so not too bad really in London terms. Some people couldn't move there though. It was 2 bus rides instead of 1, so it did fragment the community to a certain extent, having to move there. And we had problems with this new site as well because it hadn't been built correctly. So that took some time and further sort of fragmentation of the community. So it was kind of a compromise, a very compromised solution.
And how old was the original site?
The original site was coming up for 100 years old. It was very established, and it was a very beautiful site. It was built by a chap called Major Arthur Villiers.
What was his background?
Well, he was an old Etonian. Well, he wasn't that old at the time, actually, but he'd been to Eton, and he had this idea that he wanted to bring some of the privileges of the Eton education to the poor boys of the East End of London. So he built this fantastic project of state-of-the-art sports facilities, and alongside them allotments, so that the families could feed these boys who clearly were looking malnourished. So that was the origin of the allotments. He bought a bit of land, an old Victorian rubbish dump, capped it with chalk to keep the contamination in, and put topsoil on, and then handed it over to the families and said, "There you go, get growing on it."
Did he charge a rent?
He didn't charge a rent, and he was always bringing bits and bats up to the allotments. Like, he seemed to get his hands on a job lot of bomb shelters at one point, which he brought up. So you can use these as sheds. So he was always kind of providing, and just there in the background, very gently supporting. He was often to be seen up there on his bicycle, looking pretty shabby. No, you wouldn't tell from looking at him that he was a multi-millionaire. So it was a very sort of benign and gentle presence, supporting, and he always said to the old guys, some of whom still remember him, that the allotments would be theirs in perpetuity. So they had this sense that it was theirs forever, and so it was a huge shock actually to many of these old guys who'd inherited their plots from their fathers. When we were told, actually you've got to go.
Was there no covenant covering it, or?
We never found it. And it seemed that we eventually, when we did the research into it, we found that sometime around his death, the land was sold to the Lee Valley Regional Parks Authority, and from then on, the plot holders had to begin paying rent, and so that was when, if there was a covenant, it would have, I suppose, been invalidated at that point.
And did the Olympic people promise you anything, or?
After a lot of work, they, doing things like putting in a very detailed representation to the compulsory purchase order, for example. They then agreed that, in fact it was a judgment, that they had to provide us with allotments of a similar quality in the Legacy Park. I still have my doubts about whether that's actually going to happen, so we're waiting to see. But they also, having taken them to court, supported by Friends of the Earth, they then also agreed that they would provide us with these replacement allotments, these temporary ones in Waltham Forest. So we've got these ones until 2014, and then after that we have to see whether we get repeat planning permission for them, which will allow us to stay, or whether we'll get evicted from there as well.
And be in the Legacy, in the
park?
Well,
there aren't enough in the legacy park for all of us, and those people who are new to the new site, to this temporary site, won't be able to move to the legacy. So if there is an eviction from this site, there'll be lots of people who lose their allotments again. So some of the original members that came from the old Manor Garden allotments will be offered, everybody who had a plot there will be offered a new plot in the legacy park if we want to take it. That's where it's at the moment, and I think we've got that through a very hard battle, and I think if we aren't vigilant about making sure that that is what gets provided, then that very easily could slip away as well.
So we're meeting tonight in of all places an art gallery in the middle of London. And how do you feel, the juxtaposition of art, mainly about vegetables? In fact, we're standing here in front of a harvest.
Exactly. Well, I always like to be in the presence of food. It's really nice to be right in the centre of London, having the opportunity to talk about what used to be in the East End of London where we were. I do get the sense that that knowledge is a very local knowledge, and it hasn't really filtered out beyond, the sort of close boundaries of the 5 Olympic boroughs. So it's good to take that message further and to just say, look, there was an awful lot going on in that area, and we'll have all forgotten that once this big new development takes place. So.
And here is art, of course. How do you feel about that? Seeing some marvellous vegetable paintings.
Yes, they are, and the beauty of these reminds me of the beauty of the old allotments, and there was a huge amount of art inspired by the allotment. I think food growing and that kind of aesthetic that you get with allotments does inspire artists, because it is very creative and very sort of random. So it's lovely to see that. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thanks for your patience.